KwaZulu-Natal Transport MEC Siboniso Duma says the provincial government has put measures in place to respond to the adverse weather conditions expected next week. Thousands of motorists were stranded in a snowstorm on the N3 highway last week. One person died from hypothermia. The South African Weather Service is warning of more potential snow due to a cold front that is approaching, and let's take a listen quickly.
Yesterday we interacted with SA Weather Services. They informed us that KwaZulu-Natal will be affected by snowfall from Monday into Tuesday. They have singled out the following areas that will be affected. 1, Ladysmith area, Underberg, Drakensberg, Giant Castle and high surrounding areas. In addition, they emphasized that in all likelihood snowfall will stop on Tuesday but will be followed by rainfall in various parts of KwaZulu-Natal, including Durban and other coastline areas. But we wish to announce that highly efficient and dedicated teams are now on standby. Traffic officers, road safety and traffic inspectorate, they are already involved in the coordination of possible road closures. And this time we want to just close the road on time, and we want to be strict when it comes to that. An observation of major routes in consultation with N3 toll concessions. The focus is on N3 between Ladysmith to Gela Road, R617 between Kokstad and Underberg, N2 Ingeli, N3 Moy River and other areas. We wish to indicate that the team will also be responsible for escorting trucks and vehicles to ensure that there is no congestion on the road. However, members of the public and motorists are actually rescheduled or postpone their journeys in anticipation of any eventuality.
Well, let's stay with the KZN adverse weather conditions and its devastating impact, particularly on farmers. Let's get some more now on the extent of the damage, and we're joined by Wandile Sihlobo, an agricultural economist, talking to us from Pretoria this evening. Mr. Sihlobo, good evening to you and thank you for your time. Let's start with the farmers and how they may have been affected by the bad weather conditions, particularly the snow. How badly affected have they been?
Good evening, Tony. I think we were somewhat slightly fortunate because, one, in terms of crops, this was fairly a downturn period. We start our planting season from around about mid-October. So there isn't really a major impact on the crop side. But of course, we both know that KwaZulu-Natal is also a big province when it comes to dairy and livestock. And of course, the Free State is also big on livestock. So we're particularly worried about the cattle farmers, the sheep farmers. But from what we hear now on the ground is that because there were difficulty with the movements for a few days, the impact perhaps maybe hasn't been as much harsh in those areas with regards to do with the livestock deaths or anything. The farmers may have been able in greater part to do relatively well. But of course, there will be certain areas where farmers are challenged in terms of feed and in terms of movement of the products out of their farms.
Curious, how do farmers, particularly those that deal in livestock, how do you shield your sheep, cows, goats from snow conditions?
This one, Dolly, also because of how unexpected the whole issue was this time around, it becomes a difficulty. And you and I know that in winter time, livestock requires a lot of feed because there's a lot of energy utilization when it's cold. And in times like this, when there's a snow, you really need to ensure that there is a feed supplement to assist your livestock, to assist your sheep. And I think that because then the farmers were caught some by surprise by what had actually come out, others, they may have been able to read the weather conditions ahead of time. But the issue is really that movement of the feed and making sure that it is closer to your animals. And I think that when we reflect on that, we have to also face the reality of South Africa, which is that at a commercial farming unit, to a certain extent, you may be able to store a bit of feed that you can put at certain points in your farm. But if you are a smallholder farmer, it's in various villages, there isn't really a place where there is an aggregated feed that farmers can supply the livestock, and that tends to be a challenge. But to your question, the only way you shield against the snow is making sure that you have the feed supply in a closest place that you can be able to supply your livestock in times of snow.
Very interesting indeed. Are there any positives that we can take away from this snowstorm as the ice begins to melt, even though there are warnings of yet more cold weather approaching?
I was actually worried when I hear the colleagues from Weather Service and KZN talking about the potential snow in the coming weekend. But the positives that we can get out of this is that when all of the snow finally melts, we do need increased soil moisture, because from around about the 15th of October, that will be the optimal planting window in the eastern regions of South Africa for yellow maize and soybeans. If you are driving from the northern regions of the country and you look to your left, all of the areas that are on your left when you're driving on N1 to the coastal areas coming from the north, those areas farmers have to start planting from the 15th of October all the way to mid-November. And in the west, they have to plant from around about 15th of November to the end of the year. So we hope then that all of this moisture in the medium term will end up benefiting us when it's that time to plant.
Let's talk about the next season. What do the signposts tell us?
The signposts for the next season look fairly positive. And I think if we start with this increased soil moisture potentially, when we look at the Weather Service, it appears that we are moving towards what is called a La Nina weather phenomenon, which means then there is a possibility that in South Africa, and indeed the entire Southern Africa, we may receive above normal rainfall. And I think that, Toli, will help us a great deal, because you will appreciate that the season that we are closing in South Africa now, although we are reflecting about the snow at this point, just a few months ago, we were complaining about the heavy drought in the northern regions of South Africa, which has led to a substantial decline in our summer crop, down 23% to now what we are expecting, which is around about 15 million tons. The point being that the signposts to the next season, they give us a potential recovery on the 2024-25 season that begins in mid-October.
Yeah. I'd like to broaden this a little bit, Mr. Sihlobo, if you don't mind. South Africa recently making a trip, this was a state visit to China, and very curiously, you are with Agbiz, and in a way, you are suggesting that South Africa must indeed focus its attention on China and the Middle East for agricultural trade and investment. How important are these two regions and why?
I think, Tony, while people may appreciate the fact that we started our conversation reflecting on the challenges that are facing agriculture, the reason we do that is in part because of how important this sector is to the South African economy. When you look at its production level, primary agriculture, you add it with what happens in the value chain, you end up with a figure which is around about 9% or so to the GDP, and the same contribution when you think about employment. But all of that significant contribution, in part, is based on the solid activity on exports. We now sit as a country exporting about half of what we produce in value terms to markets in Africa, in Europe, and elsewhere. But when we think about the next decade, we see that there's much more potential for expanding our export activity into China and into the Middle East. The Chinese, they spend about $200 billion each year buying agricultural products. And in that, we currently really constitute a small share of about 0.4%. In the Middle East, you can take Saudi Arabia as an example. They spend about $26 billion a year importing agricultural products. And even there, we're still a very small player at about 1%. The idea then is to say, how do we retain what we have in Africa, in the EU, in the Americas, but at the same time ensure that we broaden our access in China and in the Middle East, because we have so much products that have been planted by the farmers in fruits and what will come in the livestock and they are all searching for export markets to send that product. And I think these regions that we've just discussed are some of the important ones that as a country we should intensify our focus on.
Wandile Sihlobo is an agricultural economist. Thank you very much for your time and insights.